that you could be here for this event. We've got a few students and faculty online as well. First, I want to acknowledge that we're here today on the traditional and unsurrendered land of Tecumseh within Secwepemc. I also want to acknowledge our second host, Hulk, in Williams Lake. I'm so grateful to be here on the land, Tumuke. Ted Godfredson has shared with me that the land is our teacher, the land is our lesson. Not quite sure what lesson it's trying to teach us today. Perhaps that you should be right here inside, staying warm, drinking some warm beverages, having some warm food, and learning about the intersection between science and art. So I'm also very grateful to have the opportunity to invite a guest scholar from the University of Washington, or Washington State University, Dr. Jeb Owen, who's going to share with us how he's integrated science education with art-based pedagogies. And we'll even have an opportunity to practice that. So we've got some art supplies, so we'll have some hands-on learning along with his research that he'll share with us. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Jeb Owen.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Alana and Brad and TRU for the invitation and the chance to talk to you today about this program that we've been conducting at Washington State University for the last 6 years, integrating science education and art to help students learn about infectious disease. So this might actually not be a place you anticipated starting this talk today. But it's important to understand that infectious diseases represent one of the most complex systems that we have to deal with as people. All infectious diseases represent lots of intersecting variables with feedback loops and multiple levels. These include everything from biological factors to economic factors, behavioral factors, all playing roles in the ways that pathogens get transmitted between people, between different animal species, making us sick. These are the kinds of systems that we're trying to help our students better understand so that they are better equipped to deal with these disease pressures as they go through their lives, as they are representing and working in their communities. And we're also doing it because we're trying to increase interest amongst young learners in biomedical career pathways. And I'll talk about why that's a particular concern for our target population. The case study that I'll be coming back to throughout this talk is one of the disease systems that we work on. This is a viral infection caused by a virus called West Nile virus. It's a pathogen that's transmitted naturally among birds. So this virus cycles among different species of birds, and it's transmitted bird to bird by mosquitoes, which are blood-feeding insects most of you, perhaps all of you, are familiar with. So mosquitoes transmit this virus in birds naturally, and then when mosquitoes pick up this virus, occasionally the mosquitoes go on to bite people and transmit the virus to people, where it can cause flu-like symptoms and, in a rare number of cases, death. It can also go on to bite other mammals, such as horses, where the results are much more severe. 40% of horses that become infected with this virus drop dead. So, depending on the animal species that's infected, the outcomes are very different. But the key players here are birds and mosquitoes. So our first level of understanding for this disease system is that we have a pathogen that's moving between different animal species. So right away we need to start asking ourselves, where are these different animals? What's influencing their abundances? And what kind of behaviors of these animals influence our contact with them? If we delve a little bit deeper into mosquito biology, if you aren't familiar with mosquitoes, as I am, I'm an entomologist, I study insects. The biting life stage is the terrestrial insect that flies around, lands on you, and takes a blood meal. you may not realize that the juvenile life stages are aquatic. So the baby mosquitoes actually grow in water where they are filter feeding. They like dirty, still ponds and puddles where they like to filter feed particles out of the water. And they go through multiple stages of growth in the water before undergoing metamorphosis and emerging out into the air as the flying insect you all are familiar with. So now we have another layer to our system that we need to consider. Water. Where's the water coming from? How is it distributed on the land? What are its qualities? Is it clean or is it dirty? As I mentioned earlier, almost all of us are familiar with this. The mosquito takes blood meals from vertebrates, from people and other mammals, and they do this. Incidentally, it's only the females that bite you. And they do that because she wants protein in your blood that she then turns into eggs. Blood is the protein source for their own reproduction. What's far less appreciated by most people is that both males and females also feed on flowers. They feed on nectar, sugar water produced by flowers, and this is actually essential for their survival. They cannot live without nectar. So now we've got more layers to our system. Not only do we need to know where the animals are, we need to know where flowering plants are. Whether or not flowering plants are available will fully control where mosquitoes can survive. Interestingly, there are socioeconomic layers to this as well. This is my home state of Washington. It's a county map, so it's showing all the different counties in Washington state. These ones that are highlighted in orange down here in the bottom, these are where we almost always find West Nile virus infections. We do not find West Nile virus infections in the other counties. A paper that we published out of my lab back in 2013 determined why it is we find West Nile virus so commonly in these 4 counties. It turns out it's because of irrigated agriculture. Ag that produces fruit plants like cherries and apples and wine grapes. These are crops that require irrigated water, and water should be ringing a bell in your mind now as an important variable, that we put out on the land to water these crops using irrigation ditches and retention ponds. Moreover, these crops produce flowers, which support mosquitoes. And finally, these crops attract birds, which like to roost in these trees and eat the fruit. So we have now brought together birds and mosquitoes and provided all the required habitat to accelerate transmission of this virus. More socioeconomic nuances to this system that need to be taken into consideration. These 4 counties where we have this transmission are outlined in red. These also happen to be amongst some of the most impoverished counties in our state. So the people that are being exposed to these pathogens are amongst our most ill-equipped socioeconomically to protect themselves. They have low access to medical care, poor education infrastructure, and low income. And this is very common for all infectious diseases. Universally, infectious diseases disproportionately affect the poor. So this isn't just a socioeconomic issue, it's a matter of equity. Most of our labor that supports our agriculture in Washington state is immigrant labor from Central and South America. So these are individuals that have migrated up from Mexico, for example, and might be transient or semi-permanent labor forces involved with harvesting the fruit, for example. These are the people that are out in the environment exposed to these infections. Okay. And what's interesting about that is that these individuals from the Latinx community, they represent 14% of our population in Washington state. However, those individuals are only 2.6% of our labor force in healthcare. So even though they're disproportionately exposed to these diseases, they are underrepresented in the healthcare system. These are the concerns we're interested in addressing in our program. So let's think about this as a systems question again. Here's what I'm depicting as what I call the reductionist view of West Nile virus, diagrammatically. The tiny number of variables we might consider most important. We have water, which is affecting the abundance of mosquitoes. We have a pathogen, a virus, that gets into those mosquitoes. The mosquito then bites people and makes people sick. At its simplest, this might be how we conceive of West Nile virus as a problem. But based on everything I just told you, you know it's not that simple, right? It's more like this, where the water we're concerned with is coming from multiple sources. Weather, for example, is influencing the abundance of water. Our man-made structures and variation in the natural landscape affect the retention of water, creating the locations where mosquitoes can actually breed. That water is then being used to sustain agriculture. Although I didn't describe it, we have lots of data to illustrate that abundances of birds and bird diversity is strongly affected by farming. So where we put our farms influences where we find wild birds in high densities, which then support the maintenance of the virus and the maintenance of the mosquito population. Those farming forces are then influencing economics, the money that streams in to support healthcare costs, and the labor force that's being exposed to these pathogens in the first place. So you can see here it's a much more complicated set of variables that ultimately influence the occurrence of this disease, the burden of this disease, and how we manage it. This is what we want people to understand better. And incidentally, this is still not the full system. This is closer to what we have to deal with, but it's still an oversimplified representation. And a big piece of this that I'll get to later in the talk is how this comes back into what we're teaching students to do. We're teaching them ultimately to develop careers. And we want some of our students to ultimately end up in careers that are relevant to healthcare, into this biomedicine pipeline, we like to call it. Well, if we look at professional avenues that are relevant to West Nile virus, these three in gray, these might be what we identify as relevant to this reductionist view. We might say that we need people that are virologists that study viruses to help us understand this virus. And we need entomologists like myself to help us understand mosquitoes. And then we need doctors to help people when they get sick. But in black are just a handful of professions that are relevant to the broader system. We need people that study climate. We need people that are demographers, that are cartographers, engineers, people that are in agriculture, economics, environmental sciences of all different kinds. We need all of those areas of expertise for us to understand this broader system. So the suite of professions that are relevant here is much more diverse than those top three. And these are all different inroads, all different pathways to professional careers that are really important to how we understand and manage infectious disease. And we want our students to recognize those pathways, to see themselves as accessing those pathways. Okay, so finally getting to what you're here to really hear about. We have a program that's funded by the National Institutes of Health to essentially try and build systems level thinking in young learners. We want young learners to try and envision and understand these broader systems at the systems level. Secondarily, but just as important, we want them to identify and self-actualize career pathways that are relevant to infectious disease, seeing themselves accessing careers other than just becoming doctors or nurses, for example. To accomplish this, we've required a big, diverse team across our university representing disciplines that include STEM education, psychology, entomology, our School of Medicine, our School of Nursing, youth development. So not only do we have this large academic team, but we've worked with practicing teachers, practicing artists, and community leaders to help develop curricula that are relevant to the communities we're trying to serve and are impactful. We've used a number of different art modalities in the curricula that we've developed, and I'll talk about some examples from a handful of these, but they include photography, drawing, painting, sculpture, mixed media, cartography, writing, play acting. All kinds of art forms are represented across our curricula. And we've addressed 4 main disease systems. West Nile virus, that I'll spend most of this talk discussing. COVID-19, that we're all unfortunately familiar with, was another one. Enteric bacteria, such as salmonella, that give us intestinal distress. And toxoplasmosis, which is a pathogen transmitted between cats and rodents. It's globally distributed. When it gets into women, it causes birth defects if they're pregnant. The population that we have developed these curricula for are from rural agricultural communities, the exact ones I highlighted earlier in South Central Washington State. These are primarily Latinx communities of migrant laborers. The children are in grades 3 through 5, with a little bit of mush on either side of that, depending on the day. And many of them are children of immigrant laborers. So they are, although the children are typically bilingual, their parents and grandparents are often monolingual Spanish speakers. So the kids are doing all the translating in the community. What we've got here, for example, is a photograph of some of our participants touring a giant mixed media model that they made of the small intestine. This was a modality or a lesson we did on the microbiome and how it's important to resisting pathogenic bacteria. Okay, getting back to West Nile virus, here's a basic framework of the system that I covered. We've got our landscape, which is affecting 3 essential resources for mosquitoes to develop. Animals that provide blood, flowers that provide nectar, and water where the larvae can grow. When those 3 resources are available, we can produce mosquitoes. And when we have mosquitoes, the more mosquitoes we have, the more infections we can get. It's a density-dependent phenomenon. Now, instead of just presenting our students with this framework and saying, look at this, this is how it works, the way we've gone about it is to essentially create art activities that represent each of those components of the system. We never tell the kids, here's what the system looks like. Instead, the kids do different art activities that, when collated, when experienced overall, end up giving them an impression of the system. So at no time are they told what the system is. Instead, they just do lots of different cool art activities, with each art activity being relevant to a piece of the puzzle. And at the end of that, they know what the puzzle is. One of our art activities is photography. So the kids were all given cameras, and they were instructed on how to compose an interesting looking photograph, rule of thirds and composition and other aspects of photography that are important. Because I want to stress that our pedagogy is balanced not only with science objectives, but with art learning objectives. We spend as much time talking about why we make art and the ways we make art and practicing techniques as we do instructing about various aspects of science. So in this case, the kids were sent out into their community. Here's a photograph of 4 of our kids in their actual community in South Central Washington. And they were asked to go out and photograph resources that they thought mosquitoes needed in their actual community where they live. Here's one of the photographs, old tires. So if you don't know this already, old discarded car tires are one of the best places for mosquitoes to grow. This is because the internal space of the tire holds rainwater and dirt and leaves, so it becomes a mucky puddle that mosquitoes grow in. In fact, some of our most severe mosquito-borne pathogens worldwide can be directly linked to the used tire industry. Okay, we have a market where we literally ship around millions and millions of used tires, and they just get discarded onto the landscape or landfills where they fill up with rainwater and pump out mosquitoes. So in this particular case, this lovely photograph shows us discarded tires that were undoubtedly producing mosquitoes in this actual community. Here's another photograph I love. Get your bearings on it. You can actually see this is concrete here. This is water at the bottom of a storm drain, and the kids are photographing their reflection in the bottom of the storm drain. This is yet another premium mosquito production site. We pump out lots of mosquitoes out of our storm drains. Okay? This one I love, horse through fence. This is the face of a horse shown through a couple of slats of a fence. It's a perfect example of rule of thirds in photography. But as I mentioned earlier, horses are a key animal in the West Nile virus system because they're so susceptible to the infection. Yet another art modality is drawing. So we practice different skills in drawing, everything from shading to stippling to cross-hatching. We then provided the students with live mosquito material as well as reference photographs and scientific illustrations, and asked them to make their own drawings of mosquitoes. And here are some examples you can see next to these kids that are working on their drawings. The ones on the bottom I love because they were given magnifying glasses, and some of the kids chose to include the magnifying glass in the drawing. So you can see here the small mosquito, and then here it is enlarged by the magnifying glass. This student has annotated their drawing with internal anatomy, so you can see the brain and the gut and arrows illustrating the different parts. It's also quite interesting to see what the drawings reveal about what the student picks up and understands and what they don't. So for example, mosquitoes have 6 legs, and here's a drawing where the 6 legs were properly illustrated, but this student only put on 4. This student also only put on 4. Mosquitoes have 2 wings, but this student illustrated 4 wings. So it's also quite revealing as to what the students understand and what they're looking at and what they don't understand. Here's some pen drawings of a mosquito larva. Again, this is the aquatic larva. This is a reference photograph provided to the students, and you can see two different drawings using that reference photograph as inspiration. So these are techniques that the students are using to become much more familiar and grounded with this key organism in this disease system. More recently, what we've been focusing on is what we call cartographic art. And this is an example where we've actually worked closely with a professional artist in development of our curricula. Emily Garfield is a professional artist who works on imaginary maps. And Emily's goal as an artist is to disrupt our notion of why we make maps and the rules that we employ in map making. Her goal is to try to get us to rethink the purpose of maps, the values that are represented in maps, and the steps we take in the creation of maps. So using some of her goals as an artist, we leverage that to inspire some of the development of our own curricula that I'll show you here. So one was this process we called collective map making, or the enduring map. This is where the kids actually work together in groups on one gigantic communal map. A map representing not only their actual living spaces, but imaginary constructs of things that they were interested in having represented in their personal world. And these maps were made over a period of 7 days while we carried out our curricula during a summer program. So as they started to learn more and more about West Nile virus, more and more of those images started to show up in the maps that they were making. Here's one panel from that map that I particularly love. It's got lots of West Nile virus system elements in it. First, we have a river shown in blue. We have a horse, so this is a mixed media piece of art. A horse sticker that's been added showing us the horse drinking from the river. So we have water, critical for our mosquito habitat. We have horse, a critical animal susceptible to the virus. Over here we have a series of trees. Some of the trees have been put in using colored pencil. Some of these are actual leaves. They were collected outside and glued onto the paper. We have a little bird nest made out of yarn with buttons for eggs. We have a house that's been illustrated over here, moss that's been glued down to illustrate ground cover. We have some realistic animals, some not realistic, kind of imaginary creatures like this being over here. Our mosquito, rather than being a very realistic mosquito, appears to be this quite monstrous looking, multi-tentacled creature with feathers and button eyes descending on this horse. So we have spatial representation of elements critical to the system. We have creatures, both real and imagined, put into the system. So it's this quite elegant, beautiful piece of art representing this confluence of both imagination and the realities of this disease system represented in this map. Another element of map making that we employed, as I mentioned, water is critical. And where water accumulates on the ground, where on the landscape it accumulates, is going to control where we can have mosquitoes. And we wanted them to understand that process. So in order to get them to grasp hydrology, we did a project where we had paper. They crunched up the paper to make it a three-dimensional landscape. And then they poured watercolor paint onto the paper so that it would run through the channels that they'd created in their crinkled paper landscape, basically assigning color to where water would run. And you end up with these beautiful, abstract, three-dimensional paper art showing us where water goes. Okay? Okay. Another exercise that I really liked a lot is called countermapping. Countermapping is actually a process by which mapping is reimagined. Most often, countermapping is used to confront and upend our notions of who has the dominant control over a landscape. So whereas traditional maps might be representing Eurocentric colonizer values and objectives, we can reimagine maps, for example, from indigenous or disenfranchised people's perspectives. So essentially, countermapping is just taking a map and redoing it with a new set of objectives or values. So we took the idea of countermapping and applied it to this West Nile virus system. What we had the students do was make an image showing the spatial representation of things important to West Nile virus. Here's an original image on the top. It includes a house, birds, which are these little V shapes flying through the sky, flowers. Over here's a tree with a mosquito perched in it. Now the task was take that map and recreate it so that the risk of West Nile virus is decreased. The student took the map, took scissors, and cut it up into pieces, and then used those pieces to make a new image down below, where the birds are now removed, because the birds are the source of West Nile virus. The flowers are now gone, because the flowers were supporting the mosquitoes. And the house, which was originally right next to the mosquito, has been moved further away. Okay, so this is how the student has decided, I'm going to reimagine my world so it's safer for me. Here's one that's a little more abstract. The original's on the top. These images up here, this is the interior of the student's house with a horse living outside next to the house. When asked to make the environment safer, the student cut the map up into pieces and then moved the horse to the inside of the house to make the horse safer from mosquito bites. Here's one where the original picture showed the house and clouds and a pond, trees and animals. And then when asked to make it safer for people from mosquitoes, the student opted to just draw a line representing an imaginary barrier or force field that even bisects the sun, so that the people are on one side and everything the mosquitoes need is on the other side. This one, the student originally drew people and a pond, which can produce mosquitoes, and then when asked to make it safer, added a cover that people are going to lower over and cover the pond so that the mosquitoes can't get in or out of the pond. So these are all examples of where the original conception of spatial arrangements for these things in this system, this West Nile virus system, are reimagined and repositioned. Whether that's possible or not isn't really the point. What is important is that the students understand these spatial relationships between these factors and can imagine a way in which those relationships are disrupted to make things safer. So again, what we've done is provided different art experiences that represent individual aspects of this system. And then at the end, what we hope is that they understand or have developed an understanding of the broader system. I forgot to mention, so here's an example of our landscape representing animals, flowers, and water, which then feed into mosquitoes, and then ultimately illness. And I love this. This is a little line drawing. Here's a sick person on a bed with a thermometer. And here is the doctor with a lot of confidence and sass saying, "You have West Nile virus." That's the diagnosis. So, how do we know if we've moved the needle on any of this? In addition to developing these curricula, we've employed a lot of different assessment tools to monitor learning. These include written questionnaires. We also provide students with selections of photographs that are and are not related to mosquitoes and West Nile virus, and then ask them to pick photos that they think are related to mosquitoes or West Nile virus. We conduct interviews with the students and evaluate their art directly. So here are some data from our study. On the x-axis are variables associated with West Nile virus: mosquitoes, birds, horses, leaves, and so forth. The y-axis is the percentage of images selected for each of those categories in an image selection assessment. And the assessments were done before the curricula were experienced. Those are the pre-assessments in red. And then after the curricula were experienced, those are the post-assessments in black. Notice that for when the students were asked which images are related to mosquitoes, there really is no change in how many students select the pictures of mosquitoes. They all know what a mosquito is. 90+% of the kids pick the pictures of mosquitoes when you ask them to find mosquito pictures. But look at the other variables. The ones in red are our pre-assessments. Notice that all the other variables have very low recognition before our curricula were done. After our curricula, shown with the black lines, we see this rapid rise in the number of other categories of images that were selected. All of a sudden, students are picking birds and horses and leaves and water as critical things with mosquitoes and West Nile virus. Previously, they didn't think those were even relevant. And just as controls, notice that things that aren't important to mosquitoes, like dry land, grassland, or parking lots, are infrequently selected in both cases. So this suggests that by doing these art activities, the students have actually picked up a greater understanding of how many variables are at play for this disease system. What about career selection? Same format. Here, however, we have career on the x-axis, percent selected on the y, pre-curricula in red, post-curricula in black. Notice that before the curricula, most students wanted to be doctors or nurses. They thought those things were most relevant to managing disease, especially West Nile virus. But after going through our curricula, we see increases across almost all other career options. Massive increases in those that want to be veterinarians. Massive increases in those that want to study disease dynamics, epidemiologists. Increases in those that want to control pests like mosquitoes. Increases in those that want to be biologists. So we actually see a decrease in those that want to be doctors and nurses, and it's probably because they realize these other careers are way cooler. And all of these other careers, like I said earlier, are really relevant to our understanding of how the full system works. These are valuable careers. They're not traditional biomedical careers per se, but they absolutely are vital to our understanding of infectious disease. They make real contributions to that. We also see in the art evidence of systems level thinking. So here's a mixed media piece that includes a map of the students' community, various aspects of the mosquito life cycle, even the mosquito ecology. Here's a spider, which it says is the mosquito's predator, which would control mosquito populations. We have photographs showing the various resources necessary for mosquito development. So lots of different aspects of the system are represented in this art. Here's another example. We have a photograph of a horse with a drawing of a mosquito trying to blood feed on that horse. We have a pool of water at the bottom of the drain with a mosquito larva living in it. Flowers that they use for nectar. This is a photograph of a spider along with a spider drawing to illustrate the effect of predators controlling the mosquito that transmits the pathogen. So lots of different factors represented in one piece of art. So in summary, we think that our approach here does actually help to develop a systems level understanding of disease. After doing these various art activities, we find the students recognize as important more variables than they did before doing the art. We're seeing more complex connections represented in the art that they do. They're also identifying valuable, diversified pathways to professions that are connected in traditional biomedical ways and in non-traditional ways. I don't really have time to discuss it, but I can talk with anybody that wants to know more about it later. Products from our project include curricula, over 40 hours of curricula across 4 disease systems that are all going to be open access when the project is finalized. People will be able to download the curricula as PDFs that contain all the instructions on how to do the art activities, and it includes all the learning objectives, both art and science learning objectives for US state learning standards, as well as the science background for anybody that's not confident that they know about the science that's being represented in the art that the students do. We've been involved with teacher training, so we've been doing a lot of professional development with active service teachers in the development of the programming. All of the work we've done has been involved with university and community collaboration, working with community partners. And we're in the process of developing a website that'll be the clearinghouse for all of this work. So it's still in construction. So if you go to it, don't be disappointed. A lot of it still needs to be finalized. So I'll leave this as a placeholder and open it up to questions if there's time for that. If not,
We may have time for one question.
okay, one question. It better be good. Just kidding. Any questions? Yes.
I have a question. Like when we talk about biodiversity and having a lot of organisms around, we say that all animals are good for the ecosystem. Does that mean that if we see a mosquito, should we kill it or should we not kill it?
The question is understanding the value of biodiversity, which is a value to most of us now, especially those of us in the sciences. Is it bad? Should we kill a mosquito or not? I often get asked the questions like, what good are mosquitoes? All they ever seem to do is make me suffer and kill people or things like that. I wish I had a good answer for you. I can tell you that, as with all organisms, mosquitoes play a role in food webs. There are other species that rely on them as food sources. I mentioned that the larvae are filter feeding, which means that they actually can improve water quality by removing material from water that's bad. So they aren't universally bad. I think really it comes down to you've got to make context-specific decisions about when they should be controlled, and otherwise probably just let them be.